Welcome everyone to Bonington Gallery. Those of you who are here to listen and observe, and those of you who are actively participating and contributing. Is the sound coming through okay to everybody? Yeah, great. It's great to have you all here. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Tom Godfrey. I'm the director of Bonington Gallery, and also to introduce some other members of our team. We've got Josh at the back there. Give us a wave, Josh. We've got our deputy curator. We've got Alex over there, who's sort of giving us AV support, and also going to wear another hat a bit later for the Q&A at the end of the day. And Antonia is at the back there as well. So we're all on hand to assist and help in any way today. So yeah. I used to just do these like free form, but now I sort of have to write a script to sort of try and stay on track. So just, bear with me. We're delighted to be hosting today's event and welcome you all to the gallery. Having a gallery that only has one space means that we conflate a wide range of activity within this single room, which helps us to sort of avoid a sort of segregation or a hierarchy towards different forms of practice and discourse, or attaching certain types of activity to certain spaces. So it's great to be sort of discussing things related to exhibition making within an exhibition space and the sort of ghosts and the potential that this space holds. Bonington Gallery has been here since 1969. It's first constructed as part of the purpose-built art school that we're situated within today. And we're very proud, as mentioned, of our art school context. And we actively use it as inspiration and advocacy to present a programme that is naturally multidisciplinary and embraces the sort of in progress, in process spirit of what's happening in the neighbouring spaces around this building. Being a very small team, we naturally reach out to and embrace knowledge bases and sources within the university and beyond that can expand what we're able to do with the programme, but also what we're able to provide to the practitioners that we work with. An example of this is formations. My presentation is very short, by the way. It's going to be ending very soon, but anyway, so don't get too prepared for something. This is my only slide. So Formations is our 4-year collaboration with NTU's Post-Colonial Studies Centre, which is co-directed by our esteemed colleagues Jenny Ramone and Nicole Tiara, and is supported by a broad range of staff and student researchers. And Formations formed the basis of Caroline and Claudia's invitation to us to host today's event. And Formations began as our sort of critical response to an invitation from the university to contribute something to Black History Month, which has now expanded into a 4-year programme and 75 events. It's an integral part of our programme, and how it informs, influences and contextualises our operation and exhibition programme can also be demonstrated in recent exhibitions with Onyeka Igwe, Oisin Siva and Cedar Lewison. So I encourage you to visit our YouTube channel to visit these. They're all archived on there. They're all mainly online events as well, and the beauty of that is each event we do immediately joins an archive, and more and this is just a selection of 9 from the sort of 70 plus events. They become a resource, and I think what's really great here at the university is we hear more and more staff using the documentation and the videos and the recordings of the events that we do as teaching resources, which is really great for us as a gallery within a university, that we can become that resource and help inform and influence what's being taught here. Please, following today's event, do go on our YouTube channel and check out these events. But this sort of gives you a bit of a selection anyway of things that we do. And just to point out a few sort of housekeeping things before sort of hand back over. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if you do hear one, then please just leave the building as you came in. Toilets are outside the door, turn left and go down the corridor there. There's also a little drinks fountain down there as well, so refill your drinks bottles or anything you like from down there. Due to the degree shows happening at the moment, we're not able to sort of branch out and use any of the other spaces around the gallery. So we're going to be doing everything in here today. So the refreshments at the back there, there's still loads of pastries left and coffee, juice. Just help yourself to that throughout the whole day. For lunch, we'll be bringing lunch into here as well. But feel free to take food outside the front of the building. It's okay weather-wise out there, or just have a little wander around or something if you want to have a little bit of a breakout. And we'll do our best to maintain an appearance of slickness throughout the day as well. But, you know, the nice thing about doing everything in here, you can see the bones of how we deliver these events around you all the time. And sometimes it's quite nice to allow that sort of slippage to happen, and everyone can relax a little bit and know that they're all sort of part of the same thing. But yeah, so excuse any technical mishaps. I'm sure there won't be any, Alex. You'll see it all in one space. There's no behind the scenes happening in here today. But yeah, welcome to you. I really hope you enjoy the day, and yeah, thanks very much. Okay.
But without further ado, let me introduce you Jessica Taylor. So Jessica is a Barbadian curator, producer and writer based in London. And Jessica is the Deputy Artistic Director of the International Curators Forum, ICF, in London. Among other projects, she co-curated ICF Diaspora Pavilion and Diaspora Pavilion 2 in Venice, Sydney, London and Wolverhampton. She also produced the exhibition Arrivant, Art and Migration in the Anglophone Caribbean World at the Barbados Museum, and the multi-site program Curating the International Diaspora in Sharjah, Barbados and Martinique. Prior to joining ICF, Jessica worked as an assistant curator at the Barbados Museum and holds a BA in Art History and Philosophy from McGill University in Montreal, and an MA in Curating Contemporary Art from the Royal College of Art in London. Jessica was the 2021-2022 International Research Fellow at the Caribbean Cultural Institute at the Perez Art Museum in Miami. And please join me, please join me to welcome Jessica here.
Is that okay? Okay, I saw your arrows. Perfect. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here today. Thank you for the invitation to present on a project that I have been working on for almost 8 years now, beginning in 2016 with my colleagues at the International Curators Forum. This is actually my first chance to reflect on the project since we completed the second iteration last year, and while in the development phase for the third iteration now. So I'm going to talk through what we've done and where we're going. So the Diaspora Pavilion began as a theoretical challenge to the inaccessibility of mega exhibitions like the Venice Biennale through the act of opening up a space for creative practitioners from diasporic backgrounds to gather and critically discuss contemporary creative practice. In its early conception, almost 10 years ago, the Diaspora Pavilion sought to confront the sovereignty of the national pavilion model within the Venice Biennale and carve out a space for diasporic creative practitioners within the arena of the world's oldest Biennale. Within that space, the aim was to nurture and platform artistic practitioners and practices that in many ways expanded, complicated, and even destabilized diaspora as a term. Excuse me. Whilst highlighting the continued relevance that diaspora as a lived reality holds today. The desire for such a project was vocalized by my colleague David A. Bailey during the launch of ICF in Venice in 2007, and it remained a long-held ambition until 2017, when we realized a major exhibition featuring 19 UK-based artists, 33 artworks, and live programming in a rented palazzo held to coincide with the 57th Venice Biennale. In describing the impetus for this first convening and symposium in Venice in 2007, when ICF was launched, David highlighted the desire to take as many people of color working in the arts as they could on the grand tour of exhibitions. During the summer of 2007, the 52nd Biennale, Documenta 12, Münster 07, and Art Basel 38 all opened, marking what is known as the Grand Tour, a coinciding of major European art exhibitions that only happens every 10 years. David remembers that the more people he spoke to about their desire to do this tour, the clearer it became that not only had this form of gathering not been done before in those spaces, but that to hold this space consistently, they needed a strategic approach to this type of collective action. This foresight is of huge importance to understanding the trajectory of the Diaspora Pavilion, because without the formation of ICF as an organization with a commitment to building spaces and networks for dialogues around diaspora over the next 10 years, the foundation and wider body of work underpinning the Diaspora Pavilion project would not exist. The artistic director of the 2007 Venice Biennale, Robert Storr, promoted ICF Symposium as a collateral event and even participated in the symposium, including a potent exchange with curator of the African Pavilion, Simon Ajami. Between 2007 and 2017, ICF created regular opportunities for artists and curators to gather and be in dialogue with biennials and triennials around the world, including Istanbul, Gwangju, Sharjah, Alexandria, Liverpool, Berlin, Yokohama, and Prospect, New Orleans. In addition to the critical knowledge and exchange that was facilitated in these gatherings, fostering increased access to these major art events for emerging practitioners and practitioners from diasporic backgrounds became a major focus of ICF's work. Returning to Venice regularly, ICF presented talks at the British Pavilion to mark the occasion of Steve McQueen representing Britain in 2009, and Okweon Weezer acting as the Biennale Artistic Director in 2015. It was Okwe's 2015 biennial, All the World's Futures, which reinforced for David the urgency of fostering a space for a diaspora pavilion in 2017. And for myself, having not witnessed Okwe's 1997 Johannesburg Biennial or the 2002 Documenta in person, experiencing his Venice Biennale was illuminating, sparking practical considerations of the curatorial capacity to nurture multiplicity as a strategy against unitary visions and systems of power. In a 2018-19 interview with myself and David, Venice to Wolverhampton and Beyond, contextualizing the Diaspora Pavilion, Catherine Spencer and Kate Keohane trace the critical discourse upon which the Diaspora Pavilion sits. Okweon Weezer's attentiveness to myriad diasporic histories and their differential relations, Edouard Glisson's framing of diaspora as the passage from unity to multiplicity, and Kobina Mercer's examination of the emergence of the term diaspora in art history and visual production, through the works of Stuart Hall and others. They also situate Diaspora Pavilion's concentration on diaspora as it relates to Britain within a larger history of exhibition practice, which demonstrated more complex engagements with the relationships between current narratives on globalisation and the history of empire. Central to ICF's interrogation of these histories and forces was the responsibility to create career pathways for emerging practitioners to gain knowledge around and advance these critical movements. ICF facilitated a research and development trip for 8 emerging artists and curators to attend the vernissage of the 2015 Venice Biennale, and the following spring we submitted funding applications to Arts Council England for major grants to realise 2 multi-year professional development programmes for emerging UK-based artists and curators from diasporic backgrounds. These programmes were titled Diaspora Pavilion and Beyond the Frame. The former was developed around David's vision for a strategic intervention in Venice and sought to create a public, critical platform for artists within the Biennale context while providing essential professional development support for sustaining a career in the arts beyond Venice. 11 artists were selected to participate in the Diaspora Pavilion programme as part of a nationwide open call. Larry Chimpong, Susan Puisan-Locke, Barbie Asante, Abbas Sahedi, Khadija Say, Erica Tan, Lavita Kate Clayton, Michael Forbes, Paul Maheke, Kamathi Donkor, and Barbara Walker. David's aim back in 2007 was to create a more formal physical pavilion that functioned not just as a gathering and discursive space, but also as a physical space. In 2017, that aspiration manifested as 2 floors of a large, ornate residential palazzo a short distance from Rialto Bridge, which we inhabited entirely, activating every inch of the space available. Each artist was invited to create new work for the exhibition, which was shown alongside new and existing work by a group of artist mentors, including Ellen Gallagher, Isaac Julian, Hugh Locke, Joy Gregory, Yinka Shonabare, Zachary Douglas Camp, and Dave Lewis. The artists, Catherine and Kate reflected in their interview with David and I, were not burdened by the responsibility of national representation, and instead were encouraged to participate in an open, communal dialogue with each other, with the landscape of Venice, the structure of the Biennale, and the context of the exhibition and the palazzo that housed it. We transformed the building that acted as a site for the pavilion through a live, site-specific, multimedia exhibition that sought to refuse a singular view of contemporary diasporic experience. The artists' engagement with the term diaspora were vast. They explored ancestral diasporic journeys, sought missing or unearthed narratives, celebrated inherited cultural and religious practices, tackled contemporary migration stories, and surveyed personal and social relationships to objects, ecologies, and structures. Audiences were invited to consider multiple real and imagined explorations of the diasporic experience, which collectively defied neat definition. The exhibition spoke to diasporas from across the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and for many it became a statement of the complexity of what a British identity might be and the significance that migration had played in forming the contemporary nation. We welcomed 50,000 visitors in 7 months and while the exhibition was open, and critics responded positively, despite many attempting to frame the artist's work through the very binaries or simplified characteristics that they and we were actively deconstructing. In hindsight, we were successful in carving out a new space that championed multiplicity, in contrast to the singular voice that filled many of the national pavilions. However, in utilizing the framework of a large-scale exhibition as pavilion, we were not able to disrupt the power dynamics that sustain the Biennale. And despite further unprecedented shifts seen since, inaccessibility, financial inequality, and Eurocentric perspectives still pervade. Ultimately, the creation of such a platform followed a logical mandate for fostering visibility within the Biennale complex, which was dependent on large carbon footprints, even larger exhibition budgets, and sensationalized reductive press bylines. With the ongoing development of the Diaspora Pavilion in recent years, the initial ambitions for the projects endure: to invite artists to interrogate and complicate the term diaspora in order to resist single perspective narratives, and in doing so, to levy a lasting challenge to the imbalances in representation and access to resourcing in the industry. However, our pursuit of an interventionist model that can be easily replicated by others for its financial and environmental sustainability remains ongoing. Therefore, we have shifted in recent years to decentralize Venice, unfolding as a series of transnational exhibitions in collaboration with local partners working within diasporic communities. In a letter to his critics printed in Art Forum in January 2008, Robert Storr defiantly stated, "I take heart in knowing that shows as controversial as mine have proved to fade from memory less quickly than state-of-the-art culture industry fun fests, and that in the best case scenario, the work I did in Venice may yet be appreciated as a critique by example of art world business as usual. But sadly, 15 years later, with Brexit, persistently hostile political rhetoric around immigration, and unprecedented calls for the industry to divest from oil and the global pandemic, in many ways, despite the best efforts of artists, it does still feel like business as usual in spaces such as the Venice Biennale. In 2022, we witnessed women of colour represent France, Britain, Scotland, and the USA. The Nordic Pavilion became the Sami Pavilion, and the first Asian Forum for Contemporary Art coincided with the third African Art Forum in Venice. However, we were flooded with media headlines about historic firsts, while the Biennale celebrated the unprecedented number of women in the main exhibition, despite demonstrating no self-critical growth in relation to the policy it has on paying artists to participate. Despite large, often publicly funded budgets, in these biennial contexts, more is spent on the pavilion's opening party than on artist fees. Convenings held during the Biennale in 2022, such as the inaugural Indigenous-led conversation on Indigenous art, and Simone Lee's Loophole of Retreat, presented what should be seen as interventionist programming. These were existing projects sustained by creative practitioners, networks, and infrastructures that are in no way tied to the Biennale beyond the iterations that took place there that year. These spaces for gathering and dialogue do echo the aims of ICF's 2007 symposium, as well as Barbie Asante's collective performance, A Declaration of Independence, which was here, which opened the 2017 Diaspora Pavilion, and our closing program of performances, screenings, and talk, which brought many of the artists back together to reflect on and respond to the pavilion in its final weekend, which is here. The conceptual unbordered framework upon which these other initiatives are built resonate with what we sought to achieve through our transformation of the Diaspora Pavilion project during the first iteration in Venice and into its second iteration. In 2017, Diaspora Pavilion in Venice became a site from which two curators participating in our Beyond the Frame curatorial professional development program, Annie Kwan and Kasia Sabuka, presented performance programs in dialogue with the exhibition. A later reconfiguration of the exhibition was installed at Wolverhampton Art Gallery in 2018, with a combination of new works and those shown in Venice by 7 of the artists, Larry Achiampong, Abbas Sahedi, Susan Puisan-Locke, Paul Maheki, Michael Forbes, Erica Tan, and Kamathi Donkor. This enabled an opportunity to consider what relevance the pavilion, as a provocation and a creative space, could have in a UK context, or more broadly, a context separated from the Venice Biennale. Throughout 2018 and 19, I considered what a second iteration of the project could and should look like. Ultimately, Diaspora Pavilion 2 sought to advance the narratives of the 2017 pavilion while responding to the challenges and limitations it presented. We employed a transnational, collaborative, and more sustainable curatorial approach that considered across multiple sites and spheres of artistic practice, diaspora as a critical strategy through which to relate and engage beyond notions of nationhood. The project included a series of peripatetic manifestations in Sydney, Venice, London, and online, taking place between 2021 and 2023, through which we tested new methodologies for working, commissioning, and collaborating internationally. Rather than centering a single site and biennial context, as we did in 2017, Diaspora Pavilion 2 interrogated and complicated the term diaspora across curatorial formats as part of an ongoing mapping of the rich and complex material cultures, mythologies, alternative histories, and reimagined landscapes that are born from the distinct and yet shared reality of belonging to a diaspora. The professional development of creative practitioners from diasporic backgrounds remained the foundational mission of the work, with many learnings adopted from the first iteration of the project. Diaspora Pavilion 2 began with a group exhibition in Sydney, featuring 3 UK-based and 3 Australia-based artists, set to coincide with the 2020 Sydney Biennale, which was curated by Indigenous artist Brooke Andrew. Our plans to all gather in Sydney and generate new dialogues around the ways in which diaspora as a concept resonates differently in different cultural contexts were brought to a halt by the pandemic, and we retreated to Zoom to curate and share thinking around the project. The exhibiting artists, Abdulrahman Abdullah, Daniela Johannes, Zaidi Shah, Leila Stevens, Kashif Nadeem Chowdhury, and Lindy Lee, were never able to meet in person, despite the exhibition finally opening in Australia in 2021. Titled I Am a Heart Beating in the World, the exhibition was presented in partnership with Foray Centre for Contemporary Asian Art and held at Campbelltown Arts Centre, almost 60 kilometres from the city centre, where our hope was to engage with local diasporic communities, while the biennial sought to attract global arts communities. Nottingham-based artist Nadeem Chowdhury showed the 2 works that he showed in Sydney, again in London. in a London iteration of the project in 2023. His first solo show in the city as part of a duet exhibition with Sonia E. Barrett. The project took place at Block 336 in Brixton, an area of historical and cultural significance for Afro-Caribbean communities in the UK. For the exhibition, Sonia presented Shwetal Quantum Black, which consisted of a new sculptural installation and moving image work addressing the material histories of flint, the black sedimentary rock used in Britain to construct tools, property, and weaponry. Nadim designed the multi-work installation Shah. He brought together new and existing sculptural works spanning over 10 years of his practice. These works showcased his long-term engagement with the wonderful, colourful, sensual fabrics of South Asia, as well as his fascination with embellishment, adornment, and decoration. A family heritage in tailoring has been very influential for Nadim's work and has focused his creativity around the importance of materiality and craftsmanship. Nadim and Sonia's exhibition followed a previous duet exhibition, also at Block 336, featuring newly commissioned solo installations by Andrew Pierre Hart and Mohamed Barangi, which employed processes of assemblage and compilation to pay homage to Caribbean and Iranian diasporas respectively. Andrew transformed the two galleries at Block 336 with an installation, genre painting, and ode to Brixton, responding to Brixton, where Block 336 is based. The work is part of an imagined and part physical experience, informed by Andrew's research in the area. He created a vibrant reconceptualization of painting through his expanded engagement with sound, still and moving image, performance, text, light, and sculpture. The work offered opportunities to gather and contemplate, and it fostered a call and response with Brixton's Afro-Caribbean community. Mohamed produced 5 mural-scale works using his signature paper transfer technique that filled the walls of the entire gallery. The works and the mystical creatures of Eden combine Persian calligraphy and motifs with scenes of nature from Mo's birthplace, Iran. Significant female figures from his life and animals were reimagined for otherworldly landscapes he created. He developed visual language which moves across time and space and is a different response to his experiences in the world. Both artists used this exhibition as an opportunity to think independently about storytelling and mark-making as profoundly personal expressions that have the capacity to speak to the collective experience of diaspora. They recomposed the world as they experienced it, layering characters, cultural references, memories, and generating a growing diasporic language. Their defiance of the parameters of printmaking and painting, and their embrace of the natural world and improvisation are emblematic of the ways in which cultural cross-fertilization can lead to a restructuring of what exists. This embrace of imagination and transformation took root in the exhibition's location, where Andrew and Mo breathed new life into real and imagined communities. It was always my intention that Diaspora Pavilion 2 would return to Venice. Therefore, we presented a very different iteration during the vernissage of the 59th Biennale, in the form of a new performance and installation commission from Shiraz Beju in collaboration with Siyabonga Matembu and Nicholas Faubert. The work's title, Zokon brought together Mauritian Creole and the Bantu language Fang, and translates into They Know the Wise, depicting multiple journeys, past and present, and lines of enquiry, academic and bodily. It questioned existing knowledge systems and pursued future silos for ancestral knowledges. The project engaged a body of research that Shiraz had been conducting at the Botanic Gardens in Kew into the transplantation of species from Mauritius to the UK during colonial rule and their current place in the nation's archives. Shiraz with Nicholas developed a 5-chapter dance piece that has an unfolding bodily engagement with these plants at Kew, a navigation of the glass houses that hold them, and a response to the magnitude of such a collection. Nicholas took up the role of negotiator, tracing and moving with these dislocated plants and objects. Sia responded to the installation through sound, which was performed live alongside a soundscape developed in collaboration with Nobule Ashanti. Together, these visual, spatial, and sonic elements explored the emotional resonance and symbolism of these institutions and the practices of extraction and knowledge production upon which they are built. We presented 10 performances over 4 days in the Grosja Theatre in a public park in Cannaregio, a lively residential area known for its Jewish quarter, in collaboration with a local partner, Venice Art Factory. While the site of the Grosja Theatre and the context of the Venice Biennale were apt landscapes for which to comment on the relationship between entertainment, the act of collecting, and the circulation of knowledge in the formation and preservation of certain ideologies, it is our hope that Venice will only function as one of many spaces activated by this work, which we are also striving to create a new film around. Diaspora Pavilion 2 enabled us to experiment, create, learn across 3 different cultural contexts through the curatorial frameworks of a group exhibition, duet solo exhibitions, and a collaborative performance program. In addition to the 12 program artists, we created multiple moments in which we invited other practitioners to utilize and respond to the exhibitions, and for multiple community groups to engage with the exhibitions through workshops, tours, and artist-designed activities. At the core of Diaspora Pavilion 2 is an investment in multiple site and practice responsive platforms that foster connections to on an artist's own terms. The methodology for the evolving curatorial framework was open-ended and aimed at enabling the participating artists to shape the different manifestations of the project, rather than simply respond to a set of curatorial hypotheses. The duration and dynamism of Diaspora Pavilion 2 reinforced our belief that the nuanced and fluid network of relations that we are trying to build cannot be sustained within the structure of a mega exhibition like the Venice Biennale. But the Biennale relies on a structure which automatically reads and frames work from a European perspective and can only visibilize complex, self-determined networks or practices as firsts or alternatives to the norm that has held space for so long. In its ongoing development, Diaspora Pavilion seeks to divest and redistribute power and carve out alternative geographies and systems of relations. It wants to program and resource differently, and it has long-term goals to chip away at accepted modes and processes of representation. These aims are more than just a proposal of an alternative framing, but rather seek to test models and ways of working that are grounded in equity and multiplicity in order to foster accessibility. Embracing multiplicity broadens the global arts landscape, deeming singular art historical canons redundant. 7 years after the 2017 Diaspora Pavilion in Venice, we are seeing distinctly different approaches to many of the national pavilions now. However, in our conversations during the development of Diaspora Pavilion 2, we kept circling back to the root cause of the persistent and systemic inaccessibility of the Venice Biennale: finance. The Biennale is ultimately a platform for the art market and a playground for the global audiences of means. The investment in some national pavilion outstrips the annual budgets of some small and medium to large visual arts organizations, which means that to establish a notable presence within the landscape, to produce and maintain an exhibition that is impactful on their terms, requires both a huge budget and a carbon footprint. In light of this, for the 3rd iteration of the project, Diaspora Pavilion 3, we're going to focus on equity. Instead of enabling a mass movement towards Venice, we will continue to resource a sustained attentiveness to the relations between places and new platforms for multiplicity of perspectives. We will more critically grapple with and respond to the intersecting conditions that disproportionately impact creative practitioners and communities from diasporic backgrounds, namely climate change, access, and equitable ways of working. However, rather than simply addressing climate access and equity as key issues through the presentation of artworks to the public, Diaspora Pavilion 3 will aim to be the most innovative iteration of the project yet, embedding strategies to confront these issues in the fabric and processes of the project itself, with the same strategic international partners across 3 years. Central to this will be involving international artists in the development of the project model and open sourcing the tools and processes we develop. In doing this, it is our hope that the strategies for intervention that we're building can exist not as examples of an alternative, but a form of resourcing a different landscape that centers practitioners and prioritizes equity. Thank you.
So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Ibiye Camp, who is a multidisciplinary artist and educator. Ibiye's work forms an investigation into post-colonial subjects, technology, and the built environment. She designs architectural tools to create sound, video, and 3D objects. Ibiye's work resembles scenes in the landscape, exploring complex networks and organic, electronic, and industrial systems. Her work critiques the biases of technology and manufacturing processes. Camp co-founded Excessive Aesthetics, an interdisciplinary design collective exploring data through immersive technologies and public installations. Ibiye Camp, Riarna Dalival and Emmy Baharak run a BA studio titled Digital Native and the Design Academy in Eindhoven. Ibiye has shown in several international exhibitions, including the 2023 International Architecture Biennale in Venice, the 13th Shanghai Art Biennial, and the 2019 Sharjah Architecture Triennial. So, thank you, Ibiye, very much.
Thank you so much. How exciting. Just already kind of hearing the conversations today, I'm really intrigued for how, global exhibitions are going to kind of continue to develop and improve, get better, include kind of more and more people of the global south. And so I am going to be speaking today. I titled my talk Experiments and Anticipation. And this is kind of, I'm going to be speaking about my own experiences, kind of contributing to the idea of an international exhibition and what my experience was as an artist. So my practice is kind of very multidisciplinary. It kind of involves observing new technologies. I engage in a very rudimentary way with kind of technological tools and the idea of public space. And I often think about the way that technology sits in the landscape, in particular in the West African landscape. And I wonder, through my work, kind of what are these tensions, thinking about supply of energy and accessibility to water, and kind of what are the constraints and how this is revealed through certain technological tools. I studied at the Royal College in MA Architecture, and this is kind of where I picked up the skill of working with modern photography and photogrammetry. And this skill of photogrammetry, I'm sure a lot of you have been exposed to, but if you haven't, it's working with photographs and measuring kind of space and using kind of mapping tools in order to create a 3D model. So you have this kind of transition from kind of photography that has its own intrinsic biases into kind of then working in model making. And through that, I observed the landscape. This is a project titled Data, the New Black Gold, which was developed in Sierra Leone, in Freetown, where I was exploring the busiest spaces in town. And kind of I had designed these architectural tools to photograph this space, and it came up with this very voided scan. And this kind of revealed certain types of imperialism qualities that are embedded into kind of modern photography that have kind of continued to repeat and kind of continue to leave out certain landscapes. This particular landscape of a busy area has very fast-moving vehicles and people having trolleys within the kind of city centre. And because of the contrasting lighting and materials, this kind of creates this voided 3D model, which I work with. And so this was the way that I was working with the idea of architecture, technology, and the global south, which has very much inspired my practice to what it is today. So I'm going to speak about two international exhibitions which I've taken part in. The first was Rights of Future Generations, which was curated by Adrian Lahoud, who was my dean at the Royal College of Art. And this was in 2019 when I graduated from my master's. And it was my first introduction into, a kind of platform and conversation like this. And I think it was a very unique situation because he was my tutor, and already there were so many of my mentors that were kind of who were contributing to this Triennale. So this was this is the Sharjah Architecture Triennale, and it was the first of its iteration. So I was commissioned by the curation team to explore the sacred forests of Ethiopia. And the way that I was introduced into this, I was already working with model making and ideas around the spaces that are resistant to technology. And so I was lucky enough to engage in conversation with Adrian and the curation team about how we would approach this commission that they had very, very kindly given me the opportunity for. So we were looking at the sacred forests of Ethiopia that were in the Inhama region in northern Ethiopia. And before, these spaces were kind of immense kind of forest landscapes. And over kind of the 70s, that when there was kind of national farming was introduced because of the famine that was happening in the landscape, and the forests reduced a huge amount, as you can see from these kind of GIFs which we're just playing. And so the commission was discussing how you can reintroduce the forest back into the landscape, and ideas of spaces that are resistant. And from looking at Tom Bolston's research, Tom Bolston wrote about this particular area in Ethiopia, and he has a publication called Stranger at the Feast. And this kind of, in his work, he kind of writes about how the forests are seen as heaven on earth, and that's why they've been resistant to deforestation. And so I was also kind of very curious of the rituals which happen within the forest, and looking at the brief of the Triennale, we were speculating on the future generations and thinking about how kind of the climate change kind of has affected the global south, and what are the restrictions and what are the kind of continued practices that might be lost within kind of this global change. And so I was able to kind of begin to engage kind of with the landscape, because I was able to use the funding from the Sharjah Architecture Triennale to actually travel to the Inhama region and experience the actual kind of condition of the landscape in person, and kind of be able to photograph and sketch and work in a particular way. And it was a very fluid experience. Again, I would say that the reason why I kind of say that the work, this particular presentation is called Experimentation and Anticipation, is because I really didn't have kind of idea in mind of how I was going to approach it. And also responding to Tom Bolston's research, I was kind of a stranger at the feast as well, because I'm West African, not East African. And again, we were kind of talking about a similar type restriction of space to how I was engaging with the markets, as engaging with the Orthodox churches in Ethiopia. It was kind of a way of entering a space that kind of isn't digitized or isn't kind of presented in a kind of Western manner. I wanted to kind of work with how it resists being captured in a way, and the way that it also resists deforestation as well. So with the curators, we kind of went through kind of various different ways I was scanning with the landscape, and I was thinking of the entry point, entering the neighbouring villages, entering the farmlands, and then entering the sacred forest, and then the actual Orthodox church. And I realised that these were different zones, and they all kind of photographed differently, these various different spaces. As you kind of entered further into the forest, the scans which I was creating became more like enclaves. And this was a kind of experiment which kind of started to reveal itself as the project continued to develop. And so this is an example of one of the scans that was created and then 3D printed, and kind of showing the neighbouring villages of on the outside of the Ethiopian churches. And so I was really able to kind of workshop these ideas, also responding to the themes of the Biennale. And then there was entering the space that we were going to present in. So we were presenting in an abandoned school in Sharjah, and this is where part of the main exhibition was taking place. And again, it was a very fluid experience where, you know, I wanted to kind of continue to kind of like maybe have a ritual of entering the sacred church and entering the sacred forest and kind of going to the Orthodox churches. How would we echo this within the space in Sharjah and continue to have this type of circular motion of walking through the space? And I had never, you know, kind of shown in an international exhibition in this way, and it was just me and my colleague Rihanna who was assisting me, and we were very much kind of workshopping when we were there, kind of working outside in the courtyard while other artists were also kind of like putting things together. And it was also a huge workforce of people who were contributing to the installation of the exhibition. And so I kind of entered into the space unsure of what the outcome was going to be, and also observing kind of keenly to the greater, bigger exhibitions that had kind of maybe, you know, kind of a more established artist, researcher showing their work. And also the way that I travelled with my work, I ended up 3D printing all of my work in London and then travelling with multiple suitcases to Sharjah, which maybe is something that is like, I'm not too sure what the rules are when it comes to kind of travelling with artwork, but this is kind of like the freestyle way that we were working on this Biennale. So I thought that even the kind of ways of kind of packaging the work and then trying to kind of re-establish this ritual kind of movement of the journey into the sacred forest, how that kind of was all packaged up into suitcases and then very much kind of responded to the space and how we installed it too. So these are kind of some footages of the assembly of putting the whole work together. I also collaborated with Emi Batarat, who's another one of my collaborators. We had these sound pieces as well. So we wanted to have the kind of very directed sound field recordings within the space too. And all of this kind of honestly wasn't realised until we were able to be in the space all together. But again, it was a process that was quite natural and also very much kind of informed by conversation, and maybe luckily for me being able to kind of continue this conversation with my tutors during that time in 2019. So these are a couple kind of videos of the space and, you know, the way that people orbited in the space. Also, it was a very open experience from the outside, and as you went inside, you started to kind of see kind of peaks and details of the sacred forest. And we also kind of were working with augmented reality in order to kind of think about the future of the sacred forest. So the way that I work, I don't tend to edit my models, and I kind of like, if I use an input, I try to allow the input of a certain type of physic onto the 3D model to determine its own shape. And so that's what the augmented reality was also kind of speculating on, kind of trying to introduce a future ideas into how the forest can be reintroduced to the landscape. And I found this image on, I think it was Instagram or something, but someone had posted, and I thought that this was a really interesting response of like the people that were visiting the Sharjah Architecture Triennale, because again, Sharjah is a very, I find it quite a bizarre space actually, where a lot of kind of workforce are kind of brought in who work in Dubai, but then live in Sharjah, and a lot of the taxi drivers that I kind of got into their cars, they also didn't know their way around, just like me, and it had this kind of uncanny feeling of, we were there to talk about kind of the kind of global climate crisis and labour, and we were in this space where there was such a huge labour force of people slightly kind of being displaced from their families in order to kind of find work, but then there's also this like kind of UAE kind of oil money that's also there. And it was just very interesting for me to be in this space and be presented with these conversations, and then kind of be kind of feeling sometimes like you are in the thick of it and slightly contradicting, kind of presenting in a global exhibition in this way. But it's something that I continue to think about, and I'll continue on with the rest of the presentation to say how, as an artist, I'm trying to kind of acknowledge this when presenting work in these spaces. This was a wonderful forum that I just wanted to end on speaking about the Sharjah Architecture Triennale. This was a wonderful forum that Adrian had put together with the curation team, where we were sat in a square in Sharjah, and it was kind of talking about the various different kind of conflicts that were happening in the world at that moment in time. And I just thought it was amazing because it was a way that various different people could also take part in this Triennale that was happening. And I was very grateful that people actually were speaking from their windows and asking questions and responding to the group that were presenting and having the public conversation. And so I think that the two images here were kind of like my introduction into an architecture triennale, this kind of school space that wasn't open to the public, and how I wanted to kind of acknowledge that I really appreciated that the Sharjah Architecture Triennale had this public forum, which was running at the same time as the opening, enabled to kind of have everyone's contribution and the citizens of Sharjah to be able to access these conversations in space. So last year I presented at the Laboratory of the Future, which is the Architecture Biennale curated by Leslie Loco. And this was the most wonderful lineup, I thought, of architects and artists and practitioners. It was a super special Biennale where there were many, kind of artists from the and architects from the Global South that were presenting. And with Leslie Loco's approach, she really wanted to kind of create a Biennale that was conscious of the carbon footprint when producing architectural work, and wanted to acknowledge rituals and practice from the Global South and continue to kind of speculate on what the future of the Global South will be. So I was asked to contribute to the special projects, which the title was Guests from the Future. And with the special project, we had to present work in a particular kind of measurement. So the measurement that we were given was like 90 by 120 centimeters, and we had to kind of respond to Leslie's brief, and that was really exciting again, because it was an opportunity for me to workshop an idea and also to respond to the brief that was presented at this Biennale. And I was, I guess, I kind of wanted to think about material, because for Leslie Rocco's for this Biennale, they wanted to reuse the facades and the columns and the kind of walls that were in the art Biennale previously. So they ended up kind of keeping a lot of the material, whereas the special projects curation team kind of let me know that in previous years, between the art and the architecture biennales, often they kind of get rid of these extra walls and facades that are kind of put in place. And Leslie was very kind of insistent that she wanted to kind of keep the walls that were there from the art biennale previously. And so it made me think about how I would approach my work. And previously, as you saw in my project, The Sacred Forests of Ethiopia, and I was working with 3D modelling, and I was working with 3D modelling with a type of plaster. And I was thinking, if I'm going to continue to 3D model and work in this way, I want to work with a live object. What is something that can be remoulded and reused? What is something that can be introduced back into the earth? And so I was working with clay 3D printing, again, working with my 3D models and trying to kind of allow the object to determine its own form, but also work with clay to determine its own form as well. And so I revisited the work from my thesis, State of the New Black Gold, and was working on adding a life cycle into the OBJs and the 3D objects. And so this is just an example of my initial ideas and conversation with the curation team, that was kind of like thinking about how to reduce the polygon count, and like how would it reduce, how would the object age, and like how can I release myself from this idea of keeping like a precious digital object. How can we kind of allow the objects to kind of be fleeting and ephemeral, and maybe how can it be like remolded as well. So again, this was like an opportunity where I was able to workshop ideas with the curation team. And I was in Sierra Leone at the time as well, and I wanted to kind of maybe work with actual earth and clay from Sierra Leone in order to work with these 3D models. So I visited a ceramic studio that was kind of working with modelling and thinking about maybe bisque firing instead of firing things completely. How can we reintroduce this? So this is a couple of the work ideas that I had. And I wanted to also work with a super wet clay as well. So trying to allow the actual material to determine the form rather than kind of being precious on this digital form. Like, what would it be like if it was reintroduced into the landscape? So these are very sloppy kind of tests which I created. And these, I continued to experiment with these at Grimsdyke Farm in London. So again, working on developing this work, I was kind of trying to use as many resources that I could, whether it was in Sierra Leone or London. And then this was what was presented in the 90 by 120 centimetre kind of tray, which the special, the guest from the future had to present. And I ended up projecting the reduced polygons onto the models and wanted to have this kind of like multidisciplinary kind of response to the idea of kind of data having its own kind of determination of form and how it was going to age in these very different various different forms. And I would just like to say that the the assembly of this was completely different to my experience at the Architecture Triennale in Sharjah, that, you know, we had to kind of post these and like we had to be very official with, obviously it's a international exhibition, so customs, and due to Brexit there were all of these different like kind of restrictions with how the work had to be packaged and delivered. And again, I'm not super young, but like I'm kind of still new to kind of this arts kind of exhibition world, and so I was trying to kind of also navigate the best template in order to deliver this work. And so I ended up posting this, but again, it was very kind of tricky as an artist in order to like anticipate what size work you were going to create, and especially that I was working in a very organic manner. You know, about 3 months beforehand, you had to kind of decide how much weight your work was going to be and all of these types of things. But I really want to emphasize that the curation team allowed me to have this like response to the brief of Leslie Locker's kind of thinking about the materiality, thinking about waste, thinking about the life cycle of the artwork, and responding to previous artwork, and thinking how we can undo certain types of constraints and Western kind of ideologies of how things are digitized. And I was really wanting to emphasize this in this piece, which I ended up presenting, Rebellious Copies. So yeah, thank you. This is, yeah. Great. Thank you.
So Sunil is an artist and writer. He is PhD candidate at Central St. Martin's, University of the Arts London, UAL, researching art and exhibition histories with a particular focus on Oqui and Wetzor Documenta 11. His work centers on the visual document, photography, and the archives, with an interest in analyzing their role in relation to post-colonial theory, political science, and Black studies. He is Associate Lecturer at UAL on BA Photography, MA Photography, and MA Photojournalism and Documentary Practice at the London College of Communication, and also Associate Lecturer on BA Photography at University of the Creative Arts, Farnham. Since 2015, he has been Associate Editor of American Suburb X online visual culture platform, and has made contribution to several magazines, including FOM Magazine, Source Magazine, The Eye Magazine, and FOMO Extra. So please join me in welcoming Sunil.
Thank you, Claudia. Good? Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Claudia and Caroline, for your kind invitation to here in this lovely space in Nottingham. So, in this talk, I'd like to discuss my research on Documenta 11. It was broadly started around exploring the exhibition's post-colonial status, and has since evolved as an attempt to form an alternative exhibition history based on personal archives and testimony. It is an approach which resists more traditional forms of art and exhibition historical analysis in favour of a method developed out of Black studies and the anti-colonial thinking that forms the basis of Documenta 11's conceptual logic. So Documenta 11 is one of the most recalled and well-known documentas in the exhibition's nearly 70-year history. I'm hoping that most of you will be familiar with what Documenta is. If not, in short, sorry, this is falling down. Okay, thanks. So I'm hoping most of you will be familiar with what Documenta is. If not, in short, Documenta began as a way in which to re-establish art and culture in West Germany after the Second World War. While doing this, it was also conceived as a way in which a Western ideology could be projected to the East. In a way, a cultural project masked as Cold War propaganda. What has evolved from this is a recurring contemporary art exhibition. However, unlike a biennial, Documenta is programmed every 5 years from its base in Kassel in Germany. It is one of the most ambitious and well-financed exhibitions. Most of you will know the last one, Documenta 15, was held in 2022, with some considerable controversy surrounding it under the artistic directorship of the Indonesian art and curatorial collective Ruang Grupa. Not long after the collapse of communism came Documenta 10 in 1997 and then Documenta 11 in 2002. Both signalled a shift away from an East-West conversation to a North-South one, invoking the Global South as an entity worthy of cultural consideration. Documenta 11, under the artistic directorship of Awofeso, has typically been labelled in a number of ways, as the first Documenta to be led by a non-European of African descent, as the post-colonial and global Documenta, as an identity exhibition, and as a serious challenge to art's Westernism and centrality in Europe. It emerged from a growing presence of and calls for the visibility of non-Western artists. This was bolstered by a sustained critique of exhibitions that excluded or misrepresented art from outside of Europe and the US, a growing discourse on identity politics and post-colonialism, and the multiculturalism of the 1990s, all of which brought about approaches to address inequities in representation. In addition to an international selection of 117 artists in what appeared to be a truly global representation, among Documenta 11's key innovations were its 4 platform events staged in Vienna and Berlin, New Delhi, St. Lucia and Lagos. These displaced Kassel as the central focus and introduced a significant discursive component to the exhibition project. The platforms were themed around the geopolitical issues each region faced. The platforms, they consisted of programmed talks and screenings with invited speakers from across art and non-art related disciplines. The exhibition itself was considered a 5th platform and a culmination of artistic subjectivities relative to the preceding 4 platforms. In short, Documenta 11 was perceived as being a radical departure from the norm, with its political emphasis, its deterritorializations, its discursivity, its global and post-colonial focus, and its use of new media, such as photography, film, and archives. Thinking about Documenta 11's diversity and global spread isn't enough if we are to think in terms of complicating identity and not reverting to basic ideas around multiculturalism and simplistic models of labelling, both a continuation of colonial era logic. I wanted to avoid a statistical analysis of Documenta 11, especially one which adopted an approach akin to a diversity policy assessment or a focus on its ethnicity as a form of exoticization. Nor did I want to focus on Okwi and Wezo on hagiographic terms. What I propose with my research on Documenta 11 is a shifting of perspective away from the disciplinary, art historical, canonizing agenda of Western institutions and towards relationality. I want to consider the impact of the post-colonial as ushering in the era we recognize today, the work of collectives such as Ruang Grupa in the expansion of artistic discourse and practice into ideas of care, solidarity, social engagement, community and activism, in a continued move beyond the tenets of the modern masters, artistic genius, individualism, and art as object and product. When I speak of relationality, this is not to hark back to the relational aesthetics of the 1990s as espoused by Nicholas Bourriad and co., but to consider networks of exchange where black and brown artists work towards liberation, anti-racism and anti-colonialism in order to fight the common systemic oppressing forces that continue to maintain power. Documenta 11's conceptual thrust comes from this liberatory drive and the anti-colonial writing of Edward Glissant, Frantz Fanon, Achille Mbembe. It comes from on the back of scholarship of Black studies, of cultural studies programs, the Black arts movements, from organizations like Innova, from pioneering exhibitions like Magicians de la Terre and The Other Story, from an urgency to address the Eurocentricity of art. In this talk, I will firstly examine Documenta 11's post-coloniality as that is the conceptual basis for how aspects of identity are tied into the exhibition. It is the post-colonial condition that for Enwezo reflects the global state of affairs and the social and political material reality of the world. I will then discuss how my approach to this research adopts ideas around Black methodology as a lens through which to assess Documenta as an exhibition history. I ask if we can consider art history as a set of relationships, contingencies, networks, conversations, happenings, chances, accidents, and missed opportunities. Finally, I will present an example of how my approach looks. It forms a practice component of my research based on a primary source. What you will see is an attempt to create a story, a counter-narrative, and a way of working with archival material in an alternative way. Documenta 11 is widely known as being the post-colonial documenta. It marks a continuation of a post-colonial trajectory explored by Enwezo's curatorial and editorial career, most notably arriving on the global art scene at the second Johannesburg Biennale in 1996-97, Documenta 11 in 2002, his 2003 essay, The Post-Colonial Constellation, the Venice Biennale's All the World's Futures in 2015, and leading right up to his proposed project on the post-colonial while at the Haus der Kunst, which was realised at the Sharjah Biennial 15, posthumously in 2023, with Hur al-Qasimi's Thinking Historically in the Present. For Documenta 11, Enwezo was inspired by the discursivity and political emphasis of Catherine David's Documenta 10, where he was invited as a guest speaker, and post-coloniality as a set of ideas strongly articulated in Documenta 11's exhibition rhetoric, and nowhere more so than in the exhibition catalogue essay, The Black Box. The framing of Documenta 11's post-colonialism in The Black Box lays the premise of the curatorial framework as global in its scope and as the site in which the quest for alternatives to what Enwezo terms Westernism within the contemporary shape of art are proposed. Questioning the historical avant-garde and taking theoretical ideas from post-colonial thinkers, he places the historical landscape, society and politics at the centre of Documenta 11's inquiry into artistic production and art's circuits of exchange. Enwezo begins with a critique of art's avant-garde within Westernism. He calls for a critical reappraisal and independence from what he sees as conservative academic thinking that maintains the place of art in culture. In particular, he questions the avant-garde's role, which, given its revolutionary claims, has typically been narrow in focus and commitment to political and historical vision. Despite the avant-garde being something Documenta has traditionally identified with, Enwezo adds, the propagators of the avant-garde have done little to constitute a space of self-reflexivity that can understand new relations of artistic modernity not found on Westernism. With this in mind, Enwezo sees Documenta 11 as a space in which to challenge existing notions of the avant-garde and propose a revision. He sets up Documenta 11's platforms and exhibition project as deterritorialized spaces in which to rethink or rupture on post-colonial terms the tautological systems of art, questioning of both tradition and innovation from the perceived centre of the Western art establishment. In a section titled The Post-Colonial Aftermath of Globalisation, within the scope of globalization's universalizing claims, he states how it is post-coloniality that marks its present by being visible in all places at all times. Post-coloniality demands inclusion and questions the epistemological structures of Westernism, fixing its attention on the social, political, and cultural aspects of life in the latter half of the 20th century. Enwezo sees the post-colonial space as a site where ethical relationships between citizen and subject converge, where experimental cultures emerge to articulate modalities that define the new meaning and memory-making systems of late modernity, alluding to a new avant-garde that emerges from post-colonialism. Under the milieu of global forces, taking cues from thinkers such as Fanon Mbembe and Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, Enwezo links post-coloniality to decolonization, the regime of subjectivity, and the space of anti-hegemonic agency, respectively. Enwezo evokes Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, stating how decolonization emerges out of a tabula rasa, a crude, compelling call from those colonized to change the structure of society from the bottom up, which at the same time generates the prospect of a terrible future in the mind of the colonizer. In citing Achille Mbembe and Janet Reitman's notion of the regime of subjectivity, he draws decolonization towards contemporaneousness as a shared ensemble of ways of living, representing and experiencing life, of creating imaginaries for understanding and taking action to counteract and rupture colonial logic. With Hart and Negri's multitude, he identifies the dialectic between contemporary global hegemony and those who constitute its dispossessed. It is this multitude who Enwezo implies includes post-colonial subjects who could become the critical mass of anti-hegemonic agency. In the black box, Enwezo states how post-coloniality is bound up against two essential forces. Firstly, and most importantly for this conversation, through its relationship to decolonization and the liberatory struggle for freedom from the colonizer, and secondly, how it represents a global presence and not something that exists only in the margins. Documenta 11 offers the opportunity to converge these conditions and associated subjectivities as both counter-normative and counter-hegemonic, as experimental practices to compose a collage of reality. Documenta 11 suffers from a number of problems in its appraisal. It is subject to the double bind of attempting a radical counter-hegemonic project from within the institutional art apparatus. This would on one level appear to make it contradictory as it is immersed in and complies with the system it seeks to overcome. Conversely, as Oliver Marchart has observed, even though hegemony is always owned and maintained by the dominant order, any challenges are eventually folded in and absorbed. In the 2 decades following the millennium, we can see this in the effective expansion of the art historical canon, the way the art field has evolved and how subsequent biennials and documenters have been influenced by the post-colonial ideas introduced by Documenta 10 and Documenta 11. There is an accusation that Documenta 11's art is divorced from its curatorial logic, and this appears to be a valid one in some respects. Yet, this is not entirely accurate, as much of the artworks included dealt with the social and political realities of the world, and the realities were also explicitly explored in the platforms. Despite this, it follows that Documenta 11's post-coloniality is predominantly understood as discursive and structural. However, what could and should be made of the following statement made by Enwezo in the black box? He says, "The post-colonial space is a site where experimental cultures emerge to articulate modalities that define the new meaning and memory-making systems of late modernity." And he adds, in post-coloniality, we are incessantly offered counter-models through which the displaced, those placed on the margins of the enjoyment of full global participation, fashion new worlds by producing experimental cultures. By experimental cultures, I wish to define a set of practices whereby cultures evolving out of imperialism and colonialism, slavery and indenture compose a collage of reality from the fragments of collapsing space. So what are these experimental cultures, modalities and meaning and memory-making systems? What are these countermodels and what are the fragments of collapsing space? In the analysis of Documenta 11's post-coloniality, there seems to be little attention paid to Enwezo's more speculative statements, and for example, his regime of subjectivity. He makes mention of this subjectivity as the articulation of post-coloniality, alluding to the voices of Hart and Negri's multitude, those which have been typically marginalized in the world and in art history. I would like to propose that these voices are not necessarily only to be found in the artworks selected for the exhibition, nor in the speeches of the platform speakers invited to perform their talks. What if these subjectivities were to be found in the informal spaces of Documenta 11's community and exhibition processes, in the relational spaces of communications, documentation, acts of solidarity, communities formed in conversations, dialogues, arguments, and contestations, in amongst the blind spots of archival material. If we revisit the essays of Sarat Maharaj and Jean Fisher from that Documenta 11 exhibition catalogue, they make great efforts to signal us towards relations and speculative elements that happen in the course of art practice and exhibition making. Perhaps this is also where these voices might be found. In Maharaj's catalogue essay, Zeno and Epistemics, he proposes that the preoccupation with the art object obscures and limits activities around understanding what occurs around it, especially in international terms where artists in some parts of the world do not conform to Western modalities. Elsewhere, Maharaj talks of art's untranslatability when evaluated upon Western terms. He refers to these emerging art practices as spasmic, interdisciplinary probes, transitive, haphazard cognitive investigations, dissipating interactions, imaginary archiving, epidemiological statistics, questionnaires and proceedings, ructions and commotions that are not prescripted. These are considered ways of accessing other epistemologies, enabling both other ways of knowing and ways of knowing otherness. In her catalogue essay, Towards a Metaphysics of Shit, Jean Fisher questions how, in seeking artistic and political agency in a globalized world, one which avoids the instrumentalized language of the Western avant-garde or art activism, one could look at the oral traditions of indigenous communities from the African diaspora. She evokes the trickster figure, who is a familiar figure appearing in various guises across non-Western and indigenous mythologies, and represents a third entity that intrudes into two-way binary dialogues to disrupt proceedings. In the global context of standardization and homogenization, Fisher's trickster functions to provoke using new forms of language, to transgress existing codes, to introduce complexity and indeterminacy, in order to come to know difference and otherness. Fisher's trickster, as couched in the Carnivalesque, suggests that within the locus of Documenta 11, there are such spaces created and an attitude to be discovered. The examples above indicate that within the discursive drive of Documenta 11, in addition to its pointing towards global conditions and its reappraisal of art's canon, there is radical thought towards artistic emergencies that offer a counter-strategy to simply conforming to the codes and modalities and identities of Western cultural knowledge. It is evidence of these practices and interactions that could suggest a way in which to access and recover post-coloniality and indeed post-colonial subject positions from Documenta 11. My research proposes that in order to access and understand these latent subject positions and emergencies, drawing from the writing of Sylvia Wynter and Catherine McKittrick, a black methodological approach would be best suited for their retrieval. This use of black method would furthermore entail a non-conventional approach to working with archival material on Documenta 11. So what do I mean by black methodology? In her book, Dear Science and Other Stories, Catherine McKittrick's articulation of black methodologies considers methodology as an act of disobedience and rebellion. McKittrick follows Sylvia Wynter's critique on discipline as empire as epistemologies tried to academic categorization. Unlike methodologies that are attached to disciplines, which make knowledge about categories, McKittrick's meditation on black methodology relates to the ways in which black studies scholarship and other extra academic practices make way for other ways of knowing. Black methodology is therefore not tied to a specific set of disciplines or processes. Instead, it could be considered as an attitude towards praxis. McKittrick states, black methodologies signal both a way of living and an enlivened analytical frame. that is curious and sustained by wonder, the desire to know. The method is rigorous, wonder is study, curiosity is attentive. The practice of bringing together multiple texts, stories, songs, and places involves the difficult work of thinking and learning across many sites, and thus coming to know generously varying and shifting worlds and ideas. It follows then that an examination of Documenta 11 using a black methodological approach could reflect both the anti-colonial and liberatory drive of its inquiry and subject more closely. It also potentially offers subjective and speculative spaces in which to generate an alternative exhibition history. This has the advantage of working beyond those existing discursive domains which subsume and delimit Documenta 11's post-coloniality into conversations around art history, institutionalization, and multiculturalism. How then might McKittrick's conception of black methodology be useful for this research specifically? The answer is twofold. Firstly, black method sets the position or practice in which the research is performed, and secondly, it becomes the subject of a reflexive inquiry as there is a desire to reveal aspects of Documenta 11's anti-colonial drive and subjectivity that are outside the boundaries set by the exhibition's own discourse. In terms of positional practice, Chela Sandoval calls for a methodology of the oppressed, a methodology as an oppositional consciousness, a rhetoric of resistance, an apparatus for countering neo-colonizing postmodern global formations. The consciousness also evokes the other side of a double consciousness, as first theorized by W.E.B. Du Bois, where in order to maintain an existence within dominant society, the black subject must nurture two attitudes, one which outwardly assimilates into the dominant white world and one that maintains a sense of black selfhood and expression. The adoption of a black method is an articulation of the latter from a position centered on blackness, the non-Western subject position. This position takes the role of Fisher's trickster figure. It is disobedient with a refusal to accept convention and the existing logic that surrounds working with archives and recounting history. It introduces a third provocative perspective, not one which conforms to the dominant culture, nor one that directly opposes it. But black method also becomes the focus of inquiry and subject matter, as mentioned earlier, through Maharaj's Xeno-epistemics, but also in Nwezo's deterritorialization of a documenta and its regime of subjectivity. What is of interest here is not to represent a complete account of documenta's history, but to recognize its complexity and relational value. How might Xeno-epistemics aid us in sounding out Documenta 11 stories? How do we move beyond description? McKittrick exclaims, description is not liberation. In Documenta 11's deterritorializations, there are notions and spaces beyond its geographical displacement of Kassel and its movement into the domain of discursivity that breach epistemological and affective boundaries. In addition to thinking of deterritorialization as spatial and epistemological shift, we can consider it also as a psychic shift towards other ways of being and knowing. The following is an example of how practice is realized in my research as a textual archival work, incorporating speculative elements in the form of what I have termed storying. This provides insight into the post-coloniality and subjectivity of Documenta 11 with the creation of a counter-history and a counter-archive. In addition to this example, I am utilizing further interview testimonies, personal archive material, photographs, videos, documents, and the exhibition publications as source materials from which to work on. Poetics of an interview is an abstracted reworking of an interview transcript using a process derived from the ideas above. The interview was with Okwi and Nwezo in July 2017 at the Café Royal in London. This is a kind of like a spoken piece as well as what you see projected. So I will just be reading it out as well. Rethink and remap Documenta. In the defense of the proposal, Boundaries of the art world, boundaries of Castle. Think about the map, the modern global world. Where the two oceans meet, collapse of time and distance, geographers and sailors, journey of years, 100 days, unmapping and remapping. A theme to work, different experiences, a theorist, my own generation, no deep institutional affiliation, outside of the mainstream. Not only a curator, academy, a candidate, the first elimination, it was meant to be everything together. An older curator, deepest admiration, the risk taker, young artist, dearest friend, people who were different. Demapping, whole team, different things, will challenge, spread ideas, still very close. Pure accident, Castle Hopbanov, old station, Nazis, metaphor for platforms, not a terminus, a terminal. Many exciting propositions, context is important, a curatorial analysis, hostility and hospitality, xenophobia and xenophilia, hosts and guests. The piece above is part of a slightly longer sequence of verses extracted from an interview transcript in a 6-line stanza of poetic verse. The recording of the interview was transcribed by professional transcription services and initially used in conjunction with my research for my MA thesis on Okwi's work. The interview was made possible and arranged by my curatorial mentor, David A. Bailey, who as director with the International Curators Forum set up a 2-year program of workshops for emerging curators with industry professionals and field study trips to international biennales during 2016 to 2018. I met Okwi in Munich in 2017 and then again at Documenta 14 in Kassel in June and then once more in July 2017 in London. During our meeting in Kassel, he had agreed to answer my questions on my thesis and my growing interest on Documenta 11. In working with this interview transcript, I felt its background story was more relevant to this research than my and Okwi's dialogue word for word. Although the interview was conducted semi-formally, there was a strong desire to make time for it. David and Okwi were close friends and collaborators. David had asked Okwi to help as they were committed to supporting the work of a younger generation of black and brown artists, emerging curators and thinkers in the field of art. So even though the interview was in the format of a meeting and the recording of an exchange of knowledge, there was this pressing need, one that emerges from a legacy of black solidarity and community to support and nurture black and brown voices in art. I decided to highlight this gesture of making time for the interview and what it meant symbolically. I wanted to reveal aspects of Okwi's black solidarity and commitment to fostering a climate in which non-Western voices had the space in which to speak. There was a high degree of care in this interaction, and so when revisiting comments made by Okwi in the interview, I extracted short statements that reflected this larger sense of solidarity, comradeship, liberation, and care from the interview. This also potentially reflects his approach to artists and colleagues during Documenta 11. The grouping of each stanza represents abstractions from each paragraph of speech Okwi made in the interview about Documenta 11. In this way, a strong sense of what was important to Okwi, in his own way, a black method, is revealed. It is speculative, as this is what I read into the engagement, but also what has been corroborated by David A. Bailey in a conversation since. The title evokes Edward Glissant's Poetics of Relation text, with the piece alluding to both opacity in the verses and the relations created in the transcription by the lines extracted and abstracted from the interview as poetic verse. The effect of these relations is to create a shared sentiment or feeling in the work of liberation, within the context of exhibition making and contemporary art, it represents a passage from one system of exchange or communication into another. It represents a temporal extension of Okwi's commitment to post-colonial subjectivity and voices. It is a response to the interview, not as a descriptive factual account of Documento 11, but an encoded set of relations which come to be realized in the process of recounting memory and history. Thank you.
Shwetal Patel is a writer and researcher practicing at the intersection of visual art, exhibition making, and development studies. He works internationally, primarily in Europe and South Asia, and is a founding member of Kochi-Muziris Biennale in India, responsible for international partnerships and programs. He holds a practice-based PhD from Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton, where his thesis was titled Biennale Practices, Making and Sustaining Visual Art Platforms. He is a guest lecturer at Zurich University of the Arts, Royal College of Art, and Exeter University, besides being an editorial board member at oncurating.org and a trustee at Milton Keynes Museum and Coventry Biennial. He lives between United Kingdom, Belgium, and India. So without further ado, please welcome Shwetal Patel.
Bonington team, to my fellow colleagues who spoke this morning. So I will be talking. I've asked for my notes to be up here so you can read along with me. I was asked to talk about the Kochi Biennial, which I'm a founding member, how it started, what the objectives were, curatorial approach, and practice. I'm going to be referring to the mission statement of the foundation. It's a non-profit trust. The principles in which we started it, it's an artist-initiated biennial, artist-curated biennial. It has very productionist values. We try to offer artists as much freedom to create new work, site-specific work, contextually placed within the socio-economic realities of the region. It's an Indian and international artists biennial, so roughly around 50% from South Asia, 50% from around the world. I would say it's bottom-up, and it's socially aware in the sense that it's very rooted in its community, and it's socially aware in the sense that it's very aware of the place in which it exists. We have very diverse and actually engaged audiences. If anybody knows a little bit about the subcontinent, Kerala is famed for its nearly 100% literacy. This is down to successive governments, state governments over the decades prioritizing education, healthcare, human rights, human development over harder forms of economic development, which we normally see take precedence in economic activity of the global south. A focus on students and learning. This has been really important right from the beginning, to work with children. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about something called the Students' Biennale, which we initiated in 2014. I'm going to show you a small video. It's primarily, I would argue, a biennial is an event, it's a festival. We talked a little bit this morning about the problematics of the format, the popularity of the format, some of the complexities of the format. But I would say, in relation to Kochi, but also in relation to other exhibitions of its kind, is really a site of knowledge production. And just as we may listen to music or read poetry or literature, the visual arts are also a site of alternative forms of knowledge production, which I think we should understand. And then lastly, I mean, of course, this list could go on. Some of the economic background to this, yes, biennials can bring about, or cultural activity can bring about economic regeneration. It can place greater emphasis on heritage. Tourism is spurred on by large-scale cultural projects. We see that in Venice, although I must remark that out of the 20 or so million people that visit Venice every year, less than 1% actually visit the Biennale, or are there for the Biennale. Most people are day trippers and they come to see the sites and tick it off their list. Soft power, sort of self-explanatory around, the growing soft power of non-European, non-Western countries, commerce, of course, innovation, and human development, coming back to the education and the idea that biennials can highlight certain social and political issues, can spur education, different kinds of education, and so on. Now, I'm going to read a little bit. This was the first edition of the Kochi-Muziris Biennale, was co-curated by the two artist co-founders, Bose Krishnamachari and Riaz Komal. And there wasn't a title for that first edition of the biennial. It didn't have, and there's a lot to be said about biennial titles, but it didn't have a biennial title. Instead it was called Kochi-Muziris Biennale. And instead of a curatorial note, again, almost sort of, required. You can't have a biennial without a curatorial note. But we didn't have a curatorial note. We had this mission statement. And I'll just read it. Of course, it's up there for you, but I'd like to read it out. The Kochi-Muziris Biennale seeks to invoke the latent cosmopolitan spirit of the modern metropolis of Kochi and its mythical past, Muziris, and create a platform that will introduce contemporary international visual art and theory and practice to India, showcase and debate new Indian and international aesthetics and art experiences, and enable a dialogue amongst artists, curators, and the public. The Kochi-Muziris Biennale seeks to create a new language of cosmopolitanism and modernity that is rooted in the lived and living experience of this old trading port, which for more than 6 centuries has been a crucible of numerous communal identities. I'll stop there. Famously, the Jews arrived 1500 BC. Islam arrived to the first time in South India through trade that was happening with Muziris, and Christianity before Islam, and of course a largely indigenous Hindu population. But all of these cultures, there's a synagogue and there's a mosque about 1.5 kilometers apart, and I may be wrong, but from my understanding, it's one of the only places in the world where the Jews were never expelled, and there's been religious harmony between the communities. Of course, it's not always plain sailing, but largely there's a high degree of cosmopolitanism or secularist ideals that are practiced within this part of the world, which is not the case in other parts of South Asia. I'll continue. Kochi is among the few cities in India where pre-colonial traditions of cultural pluralism continue to flourish. These traditions predate the post-Enlightenment ideas of cultural pluralism, globalisation, and multiculturalism. They can be traced to Muziris, the ancient city that was buried under layers of mud in mythology after a massive flood in the 14th century. They don't know what caused this flood. They think maybe it was a cataclysmic event, a tsunami or something. Muziris gets coated in layers and layers of mud and it disappears. And it really kind of disappears off the history books. It's only much later, in fact, European archaeologists, British archaeologists in the 18th century, 19th century, looking through archives in Rome University, in Venice University, where they have, Rome University has the oldest Indology department. We don't have Indology departments anymore. Might be School of Oriental Studies or Globalization or Global Studies today, but the oldest Indology department in Rome University, on certain old maps, this place Muziris kept showing up. It doesn't exist because no one can find it. Anyway, so they start to excavate, and each 1 meter of excavation is 100 years of history, and they're 20 meters down, and they're discovering things from ancient Egypt, they're discovering things from the Phoenicians, from the Chinese, from the Romans, and this is kind of informing history. So I continue. The site was really recently identified and is currently under excavation. It's necessary to explore and, when necessary, retrieve memories of this past and its present in the current global context, to posit alternatives to political and cultural discourses emanating from the specific histories of Europe and America. A dialogue for a new aesthetics and politics rooted in the Indian experience but receptive to the winds blowing in from other worlds is possible. And of course, that last line, anybody who reads Gandhi will know that this sort of riffs off Gandhi's own view about globalization and identity. I continue. The Kochi-Muziris Biennale seeks to establish itself as a center for artistic engagement in India by drawing from the rich tradition of public action and public engagement in Kerala, where Kochi is located. The emergence of Kerala as a distinct political and social project with lessons from many developing society owes also the aesthetic interventions that have subverted notions of social and cultural hierarchies. These interventions are eminent in the numerous genres and practices of our rich tradition of arts. In a world of competing power structures, it's necessary to balance the interests and independence of artists, arts institutions, and the public. The Kochi-Muziris Biennale seeks to reflect the new confidence of Indian people who are slowly but surely building a new society that aims to be liberal, inclusive, egalitarian, and democratic. And I pause there. Anybody who's followed the elections that have just been announced this week will celebrate some of these words that are in that sentence around democracy, egalitarianism, and inclusivity. The time has come to tell the story of cultural practices that are distinct to the Indian people and local traditions, practices and discourses that are shaping the idea of India. These share a lot with the artistic visions emerging from India's neighborhood. The Biennale also seeks to project the new energy of artistic practices in the subcontinent. The Biennale seeks to explore the hidden energies latent in India's past and present artistic traditions and invent a new language of coexistence and cosmopolitanism that celebrates the multiple identities people live with. The dialogue will be with, within, and access across identities fostered by language, religion, and other ideologies. The Biennale seeks to resist and interrogate representations of cosmopolitanism and modernity that thrive by subsuming differences through co-option and coercion. The Biennale finally seeks to be a project in appreciation of and education about artistic expression and its relationship with society. It seeks to be a new space and a fresh voice that protects and projects the autonomy of the artist and her pursuit to constantly reinvent the world we live in. Now, I'd like to show you on our YouTube channel of the Kochi-Muziris Biennale, there's literally hundreds of videos. Last night, I found this, and I don't remember it, but it doesn't have any talking in it, but I think you get a sense of some of the things I've been talking about here. This was from the 2018 biennial, and then straight I'd like to jump into a short video, a little bit longer, with voices, talking about the Students' Biennale, which is a really incredible project which looks at more than 50 government art-run colleges across the length and breadth of the subcontinent. And these aren't private art colleges, these are government art colleges, and curriculums are out of date, there's lack of equipment and resources for students, lack of exhibition facilities. And so with partners, what we do is we send young curators across the country to work with these student artists, select artists, and then there's a parallel Students' Biennale that happens at the time of the main Kochi Biennial. And this video, which again I found yesterday from 2016, is these young curators talking about some of their processes, and I think it's quite interesting.
Fort Kochi in specific, I guess it's had like a very long history and a history of one of the first metropolitan cities of trade and transport and So the remains of that are still here within the building.
15 people, last 1 year we are just talking about curation. The curation as a form to express. So that's actually, like, if you know that in India we don't have a curatorial discourse as such. So this is kind of a dialogue. That's the most interesting thing for me.
How do we sort of come up with given all the spectrum of work, what is the curatorial as for students Biennale that we come up with? Obviously, it can't come under one umbrella, it can't. And it's very interesting to see how each one is approaching it differently. Like, as a young curator, it's also nice to see how somebody else is approaching it. Eventually, it's 15 curators, but it's going to come to one exhibition, which sounds pretty insane, but that's what's going to happen.
How a student comes out of the studio space and intervenes into an outside space and tries to become the insider, and then again an outsider back into the studio spaces.
So now we are basically working on translating that event that happened in Delhi to the exhibition space in Kochi, and because we have limitations on our resources, we'll need to figure out what would be the most optimal arrangement for us to be able to curate that event, because we've kind of already moved away from the artwork in its conceivable conception. We're like thinking of an artwork as a larger construct here.
I'm working with the Northeast more or less. So I've been working with 4 different schools in the Northeast. The idea of taking the work from those places and then bringing them to the Kochi Biennale, the student Biennale here.
Over here, it's absolutely not a white cube space. So, you have these very mysterious space, I would say, kind of unfolding. So it'll be very interesting to see how in all these spaces the artwork would will it, also the question remains that will it, kind of have a new meaning that the piece would acquire. And not only like about viewing the artworks, it's also about the 5 senses, the smell. As you walk in, that kind of, the experience, the smell of the sea, the smell of the spice, it'll just create a very wholesome and a very different experience than what it usually does in exhibitions or fairs.
काफ़ी इम्पॉर्टेंट एक प्लेटफॉर्म है स्टूडेंट के लिए जहाँ वो अपने काम को डिस्प्ले करें और साथ ही साथ आर्टिस्ट के काम उनके साथ डिस्प्ले हो रहे हैं, तो वो दोनों का कहीं एक लेवल पर लेके आ रहा है, एक साथ दोनों में डायलॉग क्रिएट हो रहा है कि दोनों कंटेम्प्रेरी है एक दूसरे के, दोनों 2 लैंग्वेज में किस तरह से बात कर रहे हैं, एक जस्ट बन रहा है एक बन चुका है, मतलब ये जस्ट दोनों में फॉर्म में बहुत अच्छा एक लिंक है.
When you look at the map, I think we have around 5 to 7 venues that we've shortlisted. And each of them sort of leads on to the other venue. So there is a bigger agenda where we can start looking at a spatial narrative also coming through the venues, apart from what we just put inside the works. So that aspect of it is quite interesting.
It's a very open-ended, I would want to kind of have that experience of slowly unfolding and not give it a proper conclusion. I want it to be like this, but then every moment since the first email of approval or the first email of invitation, it's been a journey. So yeah, it's like expanding.
Thank you. I think you also get a sense of, the lack of infrastructure in a place like Kochi, which actually has been interesting because artists come and respond to these spaces in really interesting, unique ways that perhaps, they may not necessarily in white cubes. The next provocation was, how large-scale contemporary art exhibitions approach identity representation. I refer to the title of today's conference, It's Complex. I think that I wouldn't like to venture, what exhibitions and contemporary art exhibitions in general, how they would approach identity representation. But I'd like to show you a video about Raul Zurita. Just in a minute before we start, I'll just explain a little bit. Zurita was born in Chile in 1950, and the video that you're going to see is Sea of Pain. It's a poetic installation, poetry installation that was created site-specifically for the 2016 biennial that was curated by Sudarshan Shetty. The title of that biennial, we did start having titles after the first edition. This was titled Forming in the Pupil of an Eye. And in the installation, Zurita speaks of Galip Kurdi, the brother of Alen Kurdi, the Syrian toddler who drowned in the Mediterranean Sea while trying to seek refuge in Europe. You may remember this. While the photo of Alen Kurdi's body lying on the seashore became a disturbing symbol of the refugee crisis around the world, no one mourned the death of his brother who drowned in the sea the very same day. If you remember the headlines, there was a single child on the beach. His brother also passed away. And in this installation, Zurita writes, "I am not Galip Kurdi's father, but he is my son." And it was a very literary, Sudarshan was very interested in literature and poetry within the arts. And so there was a lot of writers who were invited and artists who dealt with words. And this was a really striking example of how his thesis of expanding the field of visual arts to some of these other disciplines. And I'd like to play this video now, which I think gives you a sense of some of the politics at the Biennale.
Yo creo que la poesía es anterior a la religión, es anterior a la filosofía, y la poesía no puede sino ser un acto de devoción por la vida en todo lo terrible y lo maravilloso que ella tiene. La experiencia religiosa original es una experiencia poética, una experiencia de descubrimiento y de alumbramiento frente al mundo, frente al hecho de la existencia. Todas las formas del arte son formas que puede tomar la poesía. La poesía es la base de todo, de cualquier creación, de cualquier arte. Yo no hago distinciones entre lo que se llama trabajos visuales o trabajos poéticos. Para mí es un solo lenguaje y todo es una expresión absolutamente de lo mismo. Porque me impresionó mucho cómo en el mundo del arte, el mundo de las artes visuales, cómo las imágenes, la sobreabundancia de imágenes realmente oscurecen y no muestran. Entonces me impresionó mucho el que el hermano del niño que fue famoso en todo el mundo por la fotografía al lado de la playa ahogado, niño sirio, porque su hermano 2 años mayor también se ahogó y de él no hay fotografía. Entonces me impresionó el hermano, porque el que no tuviera fotografía lo hace representante al mismo tiempo de miles y miles y miles y miles y miles y miles de víctimas, niños, que en todas partes del mundo sufren la muerte, sufren la destrucción por un mundo horrible, por un mundo terriblemente injusto. Y está el mar de Kochi, que es un mar tan increíble, y es el mismo mar, todos los mares están unidos, y el mar donde muere estos niños, estos sirios mueren y encuentran sus tumbas, es también este mar, y es también el mar latinoamericano, es el mar de todo, es un mar que hemos transformado en tumbas, hemos transformado en cementerio, hemos transformado en memorial. Pensé en elementos extremadamente sobrios, casi una obra que estuviese al borde del silencio, al borde de lo imposible, porque frente a la muerte, frente al dolor, frente a la desaparición, prácticamente no hay palabras, no hay casi lenguaje. Entonces imaginé estas palabras que son como el borde, como digo, el borde de la muerte y el borde del silencio, nunca, nunca, nunca. E imaginé un trozo del mar debajo. Entonces, que el agua es un bien común, es un bien de la humanidad entera, y que, por supuesto, en un mundo lógico, en un mundo equilibrado, todos deberían tener acceso y usufructuar de esto que es básico para la vida. Nadie debería ser dueño, el país, debería ser la humanidad entera.
Finally, I was asked to speak about a project that I did as part of my PhD research. It was back in 2018 between my university, University of Southampton, and Tate Exchange. At the time, there was an initiative within the Tate Modern called Tate Exchange. It doesn't exist anymore. But the idea was to create a space where different communities, schools, educational institutions could come in and share the space at Tate Modern. And at the time, I remember when I was doing my doctoral research that, of course, there's a lot of theoretical texts, academic research journals, magazines, etc., that talk about biennials. But there wasn't really anything that, as a novice, one could pick up and sort of demystify. How to create a biennial, think about some of the complexities involved in sustaining a biennial, and different models, funding structures, and so on. And I remember when I was doing my undergraduate in the late 90s in London, coming across a book by a pop band, the KLF, called How to Have a Number One the Easy Way. And I remember being really inspired by this book. It was before the internet, and it was a sort of fantastic kind of guide of how to have a number one hit. And if you didn't get a number one hit after following all the instructions in the book, there was an address on the back and you got your money back. So I thought it was a really, really good purchase. And I remember having that on my shelf for years, and I just thought it was fantastic, this kind of simplicity of this manual, really. And it's very accessible, and it demystified the music industry. And I thought it'd be interesting to do something like that for biennials. And so really this is where it came out of. As I said, out of my PhD research and this lack of sort of user-friendly guides to making and sustaining arts platforms, not biennials in particular. And of course, I think within that there's hopefully other things that you can glean from it. So as part of the workshop, and again, I won't kind of go through all of this. There was a whole week long of events on how to build an art biennale, and this was really about making and thinking around making. And so, along with my supervisor and the head of school, Dr. Sunil Manghani, and Professor Dr. Robert Souza, we began discussing the creation of this easily accessible guide that I'm speaking of. And we took a cue, as I said, from the KLF and from their book, The Manual, How to Have a Number One the Easy Way. And overall, it proposes that whether you're engaged in real-life art projects, biennials, or other such initiatives, or even imaginary ones, the underlying need and urgency to biennial as a verb is born out of a desire and passion to engender deeper political and cultural needs that can make a difference to society, hopefully. So as part of that research framework, we organized a one-day conference at Tate Exchange, and it included a series of workshops examining key aspects of the publication. So what we did was we created this publication, but it was a draft publication. The idea was that we would have a one-day session, and we would invite different people, and then through kind of discussing each of these different sections, we would then sort of almost crowdsource content from the book, from real-life examples and real-life sort of experiences that people had. So The title and focus of the workshop reflected Tate Exchange theme of production that year, and WSA Winchester drew inspiration from the Biennale and its productionist, artist-led values and ethos. Staff and students were invited to explore the production of art within social conditions, examining what underlies an art biennial format and the framing of contemporary art, its labor and its viewership. The overall program sought to work collaboratively across key areas of the school's BA Fine Art course: sculpture, painting, printing, and new media, as well as external participants. And the program was broken into 3 distinct sections, addressing the core organizational, conceptual, and practical elements of making and sustaining an art platform or cultural event today. So 50 participants were split into groups with experts within each field. So each group had sort of someone who had domain experience. And then there were free-form discussions, and then people were asked to contribute their findings and suggestions to the draft based on their insights, processes, approaches, and experiences in the field. In that sense, it's a crowdsourced compendium of case studies, theories, processes, methodologies, governance protocols, and evaluative frameworks. Crucially, the specific practice that emerges from and underpins perennial art events and exhibitions are mostly site-specific and unique. And that's why this crowdsourced approach. You can't see it, but I wonder. So there's a contents page, and I'm happy to share this PDF with everybody later of the How to Biennale the manual. It's actually now also on the, there we are. So that's the contents page, and you see the language is fairly accessible. Making art eventful, do we need another one? Which kind of talks about the often kind of, very complex discussions around whether we need more of these kinds of events, or we need to change them, or we need to completely move on from them. Being international and staying local, something that I always encounter about being rooted in your site, but of course open to what's going on in the world. Having a vision, how to be distinctive. Must it be every 2 years? Nobody really asks themselves that, I feel, not enough in any way. Where to have a Biennale and where to put things. And then making it happen, which is much more the operational side of things, financial side, choosing a model, being more than the sum of your parts, building a team, defining an audience, getting the word out, working with artists and curators, working with friends and people you don't know, and how to pay for it all. And then the last section, which was what happens next, making it happen next time, and the difficult second Biennale. It's never just about the art. And that last part was really about, again, talking about the social and developmental impact of art. Often is used as a kind of justification for the increasing amounts of money that cultural infrastructure costs to build, right? If you think about the great museum expansion, not just in Western Europe, but around the world today, these kind of mega museums with budgets of $1 billion just to build a museum, never mind the amount of money it will cost per square foot to actually then put art that people want to come see. So you can see that these exercises can run into the several billions of dollars with, not much certainty that these things might still be here in 100 years' time. And then, yes, as a kind of postscript, we did riff off the KLF. We took sections of it, but I like the page that the KLF used here, and I'm just going to read out the last part, which I thought really, I think, also made me think about the art world a lot. Clutch at straws, build castles on clay, let quicksand tell you lies. Take the scenic route, be there on time, use 2 drummers if need be, fill out forms, seconds, minutes, hours, days, midweeks and predictions. Fall, spin, turn and dive, sign checks, solicitor doing deals with hits and now, sleep at night, black to white, highest new entry, good to bad, fast forward, top of the pops. Reread this book, whatever it takes. No, don't. You already know all there is to know. Faster, faster, faster. Give everything, just give everything. This is the beautiful end. Thank you.
Abdulrazaq Awofeso. He's a sculptor and installation artist living and working between Birmingham, UK and Lagos, Nigeria, working with discarded and dismantled wooden pallets used to ship goods around the world. Awofeso creates figurative sculptures and narrative installations that explore human migration and references his travels throughout Africa and across Europe. Awofeso's artwork can be found in various private and institutional collections, including the British Government Art Collection and the Bonington Imago Mundi. Abdulrazaq had recently a solo exhibition at the Icon Gallery in Birmingham in 2002, and his work was also exhibited as part of South London Gallery's seminal group exhibition Lagos, Peckham Repeat in 2023, and also at the Dakar Biennale in 2016. So without further ado, welcome our next speaker, Abdulrazaq.
Hi. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me here. When I was informed about this talk, they asked me to talk about my involvement in the Dakar Biennale, which was in 2016, titled Re-Enchantment, the City in the Blue Daylight. It was curated by Simon Njami. And yeah, so the work that I actually presented for that exhibition, it had a provenance from Johannesburg. I made it while I was living in Johannesburg. And it was based on an exhibition that I was commissioned for by the Goethe Institute. So the Goethe Institute in Johannesburg, they have a project space called Goethe on Main, where they, ask artists to apply for, for funding, and they give you the space. They put it all through for you. So I put in for that, and I was selected to participate in, for a solo exhibition. And the work was titled Fragments from the City. So why did I do that? I actually picked palettes from around the city. And this was in my early days of, starting out with the palette works. And initially, my background was a painter. Started out as a painter. Immediately, I left art school, moved to South Africa. Then I got, a privilege of being involved in the sculpture workshop organized by the city of Johannesburg. So that was where my stint with sculpture started, and I decided to, pursue it further. And the medium for me became sort of, complex, and I found solace in it, in the sense that I was able to not depart completely from painting. So the medium I use allows me to paint sculptures, so I sculpt and I paint them. And that was how my journey, with the sculpture thing started. And, looking back at it, so when, I stayed in Johannesburg, and after the exhibition at the Goethe on Main project space, making the work, and the theme around the work was actually, it was just at such period when there was so much, commotion in terms of religion and social issues that were happening back at home in Nigeria and different parts of the world. And I felt like, these works should be able to somehow, hit some, some nerves, or address or speak to, the necessary people that might be interested in it. So I made this, installation, and I titled it Fragments from the City. So it was quite, I didn't count the numbers of how many pieces I made, but it was quite a lot. So I used the Goethe project space with the support of a friend of mine who is a curator, Gabi Nkobo. She actually assisted me, putting up the work. And this was, the title of the work and the exhibition venue. This was in 2011 at the Goethe on Main project space. And this is it. So basically, the space is huge. So I decided to use the space, play around with it, navigate the works according to how the space fits. And trying, with a work that was trying to, provide some sort of unity and conformity, I decided to pick different languages, to inscribe our differences should not divide us. And, so I picked German, picked French. I remember speaking, using Jewish language, to inscribe on different parts of, this is like the aerial view of the installation. So using, those texts, I was able to somehow navigate them across with the pillars and, the spaces within the exhibition space. So after that, the exhibition went on, and I just recollected recently that, because I thought actually from that it moved to Dakar, but I realized actually the works were lifted from UK to Dakar. Reason was because a gallerist came, a gallerist from the UK, which was called Fred Mann. It was Fred Mann owns the gallery. It was called Fred London. I don't know if you are aware with with the London art scene back in the days. Fred Mann. Now the space is called the Arts Project Space. It's in Hackney. So he indicated interest in the works and decided to give me a solo show in London. And that was my first stint as a solo participant in an exhibition in London. And that went on. After that, I moved back to Lagos. While in Lagos, immediately I arrived in Lagos, Goethe Institute invited me to the workshop in Dakar. So it was called Art Moving Africa. So like 14 artists were picked from different countries in Africa, and we were scheduled to meet up in Dakar for just a fringe project for artists. So I was part of that delegation, and that was where I picked up much interest. That would be my first time I would be attending a Biennale, and that became a motivation for me to attend, to make sure that I appear at the next Biennale, which was going to be in 2016. So when the call came out, I put in my application for it, and fortunately I was selected. And the same work that I had that was in London was actually requested to be presented in Dakar. So that was how, the work moved from Johannesburg to London, then from London to Dakar Biennale. So I would just move. These are some of the images. This was the Jewish language that I inscribed on the wall at the Goethe main project space. Still went on. These are close shot images. So what I normally do is I pick, I go around, search for palettes. Then I take them to the studio, dismantle them. There's quite a lot of process for me that, in me working with palettes. And they also tend to, convey my message, because I've been sort of an itinerant for quite a while. And I see palettes as similar to me. They're also itinerant, because when I was living in Johannesburg, I was living opposite a park. So the park, they would convey goods from Johannesburg to neighboring countries, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, and I find the same pallets are going to these countries, being used for commodities, commercial commodities, and they're being brought back. And somehow, that was how I started picking interest. I would sit on my balcony and I would, watch them being piled up. And when it's time for them to go for deliveries again, they would definitely be, loaded onto the van with goods placed on top of each of them, then used to deliver goods across. And they will be brought back to the same venue. So I felt like this palette somehow are speaking my language, and that was how I started using them after my sculpture workshop. So I would use them, and I would take them to the studio, dismantle, undergo each process for, to make it more usable for me, which is quite sometimes tedious. So moving back to Lagos, for example, what I discovered about the pallets is in Johannesburg, I never had to buy pallets. I would get them very easily. I would go to the warehouse and I would get them outside. They are like industrial areas. But when I got back to Lagos, I found out that I couldn't get pallets much easier as I had thought I would. So what happened was everyone are picking them up from the factories. So there are wood markets that would go and pick them, take them to the wood market, dismantle them, denail them, set them up, and they would now start selling it, each piece, according to the height. The taller it is, the more expensive it would be. And that was, a bit of strange to me because I never expected that pallets, could be sold. And it sort of, also bring about the commercial aspect of pallets, something that could easily be gotten elsewhere. And, if I move to another city, I find them always very simple. If I want to get pallets in Lagos for free, you would only get, the ones that were made locally. And they always come out very, very rough, very difficult to use. You can use them, but it takes a longer while to process them. So I would rather go for the ones that have been, dismantled and denailed, in the market. So I'll always do that. And so when I now, move back to when I moved back to Lagos, I realized that this is what I needed to do for me to do this. And still talking about this exhibition, for example, what I did there was I tried to create an animation. So I animated the pieces, the sculptures I presented at the fragments of the city. I animated them and into moving images, just in resonance with the concept of the exhibition I was doing at the Gothi on main space. And that was it. And eventually, when it came to London, the presentation were quite different from the way it was presented in Johannesburg. A project space like this would not necessarily be compared to a white cube space of a commercial gallerist. So what I discovered was the presentation was quite different because it has to work with the architecture of the gallery space. So the works were actually placed on the floor and on the shelves, and they created some few shelves around, but we just had to work with the availability of the space and considered, because the gallery wasn't quite big, although I didn't make it, I couldn't go to the opening then, but from the pictures and images and the brief I got, it wasn't quite big. So we had to work around with that. Then moving it on to Dakar, when I was asked, to present, the way I wanted it to be. This is how it was presented in Dakar. As you can see, there is a bit of contrast and difference between that in Johannesburg and with this space. The Dakar space, this is Palais de Justice, which is it's an old Ministry of Justice building in Johannesburg. So, and the Biennale has been using it for quite a long time. I don't know if they still use it though, but it has been one of their permanent, venues. So this was the way it was presented in Dakar, and it's, sort of, created, it was different levels according to how the space was. So one thing I've always, believe when I'm working with curators or projects, different projects, is I try to, synergize my own idea with theirs. We come up together, we put it on. And because I'm always aware that putting up exhibitions, and it's not as quite as easy. It's very complex. It's quite Herculean, and it could be delightful as well. And when I was probably asked, to give a title for this talk, I titled it Enchanted Conundrums. And the reason is because exhibition setups, are not quite as easy as it should. For me, in my early days when I moved to Johannesburg, before I could even find my feet, I tried to set up an exhibition as a novice. I would call myself a novice back then. I thought it was just going to be like a walk in the park, and it wasn't. I realized I failed in a lot of aspects, in terms of PR, in terms of using my own money to rent a space, in terms of trying to get people. There wasn't enough backup as I had expected. I would go to other people's exhibitions. I would see their exhibitions, and I would think, oh, yeah, exhibition is just all about getting a space, putting up the work, and you just go there. But there is a whole lot of work behind it. So I did that. I went through that, and I swore never to ever organize my own exhibition again. And that was just it was a very sad experience for me. So then, since then, I appreciated curators more, galleries more, the people behind the PR more, writers, critics. There's a whole lot of things that go behind making an exhibition successful. And I know at times the factors may be against us as artists, but with time and also the right sources and right information, it could actually happen. So that's just my own belief. And having to say that, for example, like the Dakar Biennale, I would say it's always at times challenges for artists to move in their works there. Then at times to dismantle it at the point. I know at the point there was like a bit of financial challenge that had to go behind setting it up, and it wasn't as easy. I don't know as at the moment, but a few years ago we started a Lagos Biennale in Lagos, Nigeria, and I was part of the people that I'm just part of the people that, the artists, because it was an artist-led initiative. It was started by an artist called Folakunle Osho, still the artistic director. But I got involved backstage, just here in Lagos Biennale. This would be our first Biennale in Lagos. And already looking at Africa, Luanda Biennale had become defunct. It wasn't existing anymore. The only thing we know then was, that's still existing today, is was Dakar Biennale. Recently, Lubumbashi, DRC came up, and they're doing, they're not doing bad as well. And so Lagos Biennale, we started Lagos Biennale in 2017, and it wasn't easy. In Lagos, we had so much challenges. I remember earlier on, someone was asking one of the speakers how the lady at the back there, how they, treat or how they relate with people on the exhibition ground and when the exhibition is about to take place. For example, the first Lagos Biennale took place in an old train shed, and these are where all our old trains were parked. And people have been living there for years. We never knew. So on approaching the, the organizers, they've given us the go-ahead, and the rest is up to you. That's just the thing. The government who owns the train station, railway authorities, they've said, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and use it. But how do you now navigate with the people who are residing there? They've been living in that place for years. That is their home. How do we do that? It's not easy. So we had to do a lot of negotiations with them, also inculcate them into the Biennale as security, to help us look after, the work with tips, daily tips. And that eventually worked well for us. We did that, and it was, successful. And because, as I said, although there are challenges back here and there in terms of financial aspect, but no one was paid. Everyone just participated, because we wanted this to grow. Now they've done their fourth, they just did the fourth, Lagos Biennale at it was an historical place called Race Course. That was where, probably like our independence in the night. It was built by the British, So it's they have a lot of monuments there, and in recent times, last year or 2 years ago, the government went there to take out the structures. The thing is that we have a government that doesn't really, they don't do much about art. So the art ecosystem in Africa, let me say Nigeria, then let me even speak about Africa generally, but I know it applies to most places in Africa, are usually led by individuals, private organizations, artists. The government, all you hear is huge budgets, and you can't see anything. You just hear huge budgets every year, billions of dollars, millions of dollars. But when you ask yourself, where are these funds? How are they being used? You can't even ask anyone, And it's very sad, because I remember some years ago, we wanted to go to, the curator wanted to put Nigeria forward. We went to to Venice Biennale recently. That was our second outing. We were supposed to have even gone. Our first outing was 2017 for the Venice Biennale, which was as a country. We tried going after then, but everything has to be political. And if you're not politically connected, if you don't know the minister, you must know someone close to the minister, or you know someone who can speak to someone. So it's always very, very, and that's where the conundrum part is, to be honest. Exhibitions always look beautiful, but there is a whole lot of problems behind it. It's not easy when you try, when you really want to set your path on it. So we tried doing this thing, and it didn't work. We couldn't get those letters. We had a break. Why did we go? We went to Venice Biennale in 2017. We didn't go 2019. We couldn't 2021. And we had to. Now we're only appearing again 2024, which is our second Biennale. Hopefully we keep it going. But now back to the Lagos Biennale that I was talking about in comparison, because for me now, so far, I think Africa, we have only like 3 biennales now, which is, we need much of these things for our ecosystem. I was aware when Kochi came to Lagos some years ago, if I'm right. Yeah, I knew about that. I heard when you guys were around, And that was sort of, quite good for us as well, because I was, when my friend told me that the Kochi team are around, I was, that's good, That was the first time I was hearing about it. I went to research, read more about it, and it was quite good. We were happy. Before then, Jogja Biennale came, some years, and they collaborated with Nigerian artists, and that edition was actually sort of a collaboration between Nigerian artists and Indonesian artists, And that's how, every Biennales across the world, from what I've seen, they always have a theme. There is no like set path, that is the path you must follow. But every institution, that always come up with these biennales, they have their own set path. And I think, so somehow, one way or the other, we've been able to collaborate with some international, biennales. So we're still talking about the Lagos Biennale thing. We tried. They did the last edition. We did it, and as I said, there was a whole lot of, it costed so much because we used a very big park. A lot of artists came. And now it's much bigger with much expectation. But the only sad part is it was very short. Very, very short, a week. It's probably listed as the shortest biennale in the world. A week. But that week, a whole lot of money went. A whole lot. And as you said, after each biennale comes, you sit down, you think about the next one. You want, that's just the thing. That's the thing. As someone who always wants, the best, I tried to stay. I don't organize the exhibitions. I don't get involved. I can always support, the artist or the curator if I know, morally or financially if I'm capable to. But from the backstage, I tend to give sort of support, because somehow, one way or the other, luckily for me, I knew some artists, like for example, for me, this work, I didn't have to get it back. I didn't have to struggle to get it back after the exhibition. It actually went to a private collector. Someone took it right from the exhibition, a German collector, and it went like that. I don't know. But what I'm also seeing, we need, as artists and institutions that are organizing these events, we always should be able to work together and collaborate together. We should leave more room for progress. These are just close shots I'm trying to look at here. Here, close shots. Okay, so not yet. Yeah. So well, this is it, and I will definitely be rounding up my talk here. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.